The sun was barely up when I stepped onto my porch, coffee mug in hand, expecting the usual shimmer of Willow Lake to greet me. Instead, I froze. The lake was gone a cracked, sun-scorched wasteland where my fishing boat once bobbed. In the distance, cops were slapping cuffs on the HOA president, Margaret Tate, while biologists in hazmat suits poked through the mud, their faces grim. Endangered fish flopped helplessly in the last puddles, gasping for life. This wasn't just a bad morning. This was war. Let me back up. I'm Tom Grayson, a retired lawyer who traded 30 years of courtroom battles for a quiet life by Willow Lake. The place was paradise. Cypress trees framing clear water, herons gliding over the surface, and bass breaking the stillness with lazy ripples. My deed said it plain as day half the lake was mine, the other half belonged to the Willow Grove HOA. I was fine with that. I'd earned this peace, and at first, the neighbors seemed to get it. We'd grill fish on weekends, I'd teach their kids how to cast a line, and we'd laugh over stories of the big one that got away. For a few months, life was perfect. Then the email started. Polite at first, but sharp under the surface, from the HOA about unpermitted water use and environmental concerns. I brushed them off. The covenant said fishing was allowed, and I wasn't doing anything but enjoying my own property. But Margaret Tate, the HOA president, didn't see it that way. She was the kind of person who walked like she owned the air around her crisp polo shirt with the HOA logo, sunglasses perched like a crown. She didn't like my boat, my fish fries, or the way I treated the lake like it was alive, not some stage backdrop for a real estate ad. I kept fishing, kept hosting kids to skip rocks, figuring reason would win out. It always had in courtrooms. But one Saturday, I woke to a roar that shook the serenity to pieces. Giant diesel pumps lined the HOA side of the lake, sucking water through hoses into tanker trucks. The water line dropped before my eyes, exposing mud and stranded fish. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and stormed down to the pumps. Margaret stood there, arms crossed, smirking like she'd already won. "Mosquito control," she said, smooth as venom. The board voted. I pointed at the dying fish, the shrinking lake. "This is half my property," I snapped. "You can't do this." She just shrugged, like my rights were a minor inconvenience. I kept filming every pump, every hose, every fish flopping in the mud. An old neighbor, Walt, pulled me aside, his voice low. "They voted in secret, Tom. No notice. They want the lake gone too messy for their fancy gazebo plans." My stomach churned. A gazebo? That's what they were killing this ecosystem for. I dove into research, pulling county records and permits until my eyes burned. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. No permits, no environmental surveys, no mosquito control plan. The HOA thought they could do whatever they wanted. They were wrong. Then I found the speckled minnows endangered, protected by federal lorigling in the mud. I scooped them into a bucket and called the state environmental department. The officer's voice turned sharp when I described the scene. "Don't touch anything else," he said. "We're coming." By the time they arrived, the lake was a crime scene. I stood knee-deep in mud, phone still recording, as Margaret barked orders like a general over a battlefield. Squad cars pulled up, lights flashing, and I knew this was just the start. The state officer, Ellen Carter, took one look at the devastation and called for federal backup. Fish and Wildlife Service agents swarmed in, setting up triage for the minnows and collecting EVY denke. News trucks followed, reporters calling it the Willow Lake Massacre. Headline screamed, "Saw Suburban HOA Destroys Protected Habitat Saw." Ellen didn't hold back on camera. "This is a clear violation of the Endangered Species Act. Those responsible will answer for it." Margaret's face, pale and tight, flashed across screens as she glared at me from the crowd. The HOA fought back, slapping a legal notice on my door, accusing me of interfering with community property and threatening to law 500 daily fines. I laughed, filing it in a binder labeled SAW, HOA, Crime SAW. They spread flyers calling me a troublemaker, held secret meetings, and turned neighbors against me. But I stayed calm, VYing every email, every flyer, every timestamp VY Deo. Then came the golden ticket, An anonymous email with internal HOA messages. Margaret had written, "Let's flush out the fish problem and make this swamp pretty," ending with a smiley face. I forwarded it to Ellen and the feds with a note. Saw EVY denke of intent. Saw. Public outrage exploded. environmental groups flooded social media with the Save Willow Lake. A petition for the board's arrest hit 50,000 signatures. The HOA called a town hall to spin the narrative, painting me as the VY lane. I didn't go alone. I hired Sarah Mitchell, an environmental lawyer with a reputation for shredding opponents. When she walked into that meeting, portfolio stuffed with EVY denke, the room went cold. "My client has concerns about your illegal drainage," she said, handing Margaret a packet of documents. Copies had been sent to the feds and the media. Margaret's hands shook as she flipped through the pages. The crowd whispered, phones snapping photos. The HOA's grip was slipping. A week later, federal agents raided their office, carting out computers and files. Board members started resigning, citing personal reasons, but the panic was clear. Then the bombshell. Margaret had falsified permit applications, claiming no endangered species lived in the lake. The lie was plastered across every news outlet. Saw HOA president accused of federal fraud. Saw. The HOA's insurance bailed, Leah VYing them exposed. Homeowners faced massive fees to cover legal costs, and panic spread like wildfire. I didn't stop there. I sued the HOA, Margaret, and the board for property destruction, environmental negligence, and emotional distress. Sarah filed for a sum that made jaws drop. Neighbors joined in. Walt sued for trespass, the Harrisons for their kids' ruined fishing spot. The lawsuits piled up, a tidal wave the HOA couldn't outrun. Margaret tried blaming the landscaping contractor, but he produced texts from her, "Get it done fast." No need to tell the tree huggers about the fish. The feds added conspiracy and obstruction charges. The news tightened. The community unraveled. For sale signs sprouted, property values tanked, and realtors warned buyers away. Then came the storm of biblical downpour that flooded the HOA's side, turning lawns into swamps. Without the lake to hold the water, foundations cracked, basements filled with mold. Homeowners, furious, demanded the HOA's dissolution. On my side, I worked with experts to restore the lake, reintroducing minnows and sunfish, planting grasses, rebuilding the shoreline. Volunteers poured in, even ashamed HOA members. The lake began to shimmer again, dragonflies dancing, frogs croaking. A new board took over. Walt as president, honest folks who cared about the community. They renamed it Willow Lake. No more retention pond, nonsense. A local artist carved a fish sculpture from a fallen cypress, inscribed with "Saw respect the water saw." At the unveiling, families picnicked, kids laughed, and I stood by my truck, watching with a quiet smile. The next morning, I launched my boat, coffee steaming, and drifted across the restored lake. Fish splashed, the sun glowed, and everything felt right. Margaret's empire was dust. She faced decades in prison, her name synonymous with scandal. As I sipped my coffee, I knew justice had won, not just for me, but for the lake, the fish, and every blade of grass she tried to erase. So what do you think? Was I right to fight the HOA to the bitter end? Or should I have compromised to keep the peace? Could Margaret have redeemed herself? Or was she too far gone? And how far would Saw You Saw go to protect what's yours? Drop your thoughts below. Hit that like button if you're Team Willow Lake, and subscribe for more stories where justice hits hard.